Hello and welcome back to Biology Day 75. We're going to continue on with our story here. We were talking about the nervous system. So when we talk about kind of how the nervous system is put together, it's organized both by its parts and by its functions. Some functions are spread across multiple parts, but we'll do our best to kind of keep this understandable. So if you have questions, for sure, send them in the discussion section or send me a message and I'll help you out with that. So we talk about kind of how the nervous system is put together. We have two basic kind of physical divisions: the central nervous system, which consists of our brain and our spinal cord. This is really kind of the processing center. So we've got information coming into the brain and the spinal cord. We process it, make decisions about it, and then we decide how to react. Sometimes unconsciously, we send that information back out. And then we have what we call the peripheral nervous system, which consists of our senses, right? What's the information coming in from the outside, but we also have senses that detect what's going on inside of our body, and that information goes from the sensory neurons over back to the central nervous system where a decision is made, and then comes back out to the motor neurons, which go to muscles or glands. And then we'll see that that's further divided in what we call the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. And then the autonomic nervous system itself is divided into two regions, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, fight or flight or rest or digest. So you can see there's multiple divisions that kind of break down here, but central nervous system and peripheral nervous system are the two kind of big ones. All right, so again, if we look at the central nervous system, consists of the brain. This is our thinky bit where we do most of our cognition and organizing what's kind of going on. And a lot of this is unconscious. So it's also located close to most of our major sense organs. So sight, smell, taste, hearing, balance, all of them are within our heads. We've got our eyes, we've got our nose, we've got our mouth, our tongue, we've got our ears, and then balance is actually associated with our ears as well. So that's all connected. And then we've got our spinal cord, which is the major thing that provides communication between our brain and the rest of our body. Right? And if we talk about just the brain itself, so there's two hemispheres to the brain. So this is looking at a brain from the back side. This would be like the back of somebody's head here. So we've got this major kind of split down the middle. So we have a right hemisphere and a left hemisphere. But then connecting those two, there's a region called the corpus callosum. You may hear people talk about being more right-brained or left-brained. Generally speaking, although not 100%, the right brain is kind of more associated with kind of creative thought. The left brain is kind of more associated with language and math, but not 100%. There's a good bit of overlap. But there's something interesting here because this corpus callosum allows the two halves to talk back and forth. And so in a few cases, they actually had to do surgery and cut that corpus callosum of some people. So now the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere of the brain don't actually talk to each other. So if you watch this video clip, it's about a guy who essentially is walking around with kind of two fully functional brains that don't communicate to each other directly. So interesting kind of situation. If we look at the brain from the side, so here we're looking at the side of the brain. So the person's face would be on our left here. So we've got one region called the frontal lobe, and this is we evaluate consequences, make judgments, form plans. This is one of the last parts of the brain to fully mature. In the very front region, there's an area called the prefrontal cortex that's not thought to really be mature until people are in their early to mid 20s. And that's a major part of the evaluating consequences. So when you're a teenager and you're like, why did I do that stupid thing? Well, part of it is your prefrontal cortex is not fully developed yet. The temporal lobe is just down from that, and that's associated with hearing and smell. Occipital lobe is in the very back here, and that's associated with vision. And then the parietal lobe is up here, and that's associated with reading and speech. And then across the very back part of our brain, this is our brain stem here, but just kind of coming up from that, we have this area called the cerebellum, and that gives us idea of kind of muscle and joint position, kind of where we know where our body is. And then as an interesting aside, most of what we know about the brain happens as a result of people having brain damage. So if somebody gets hit on the head or they suffer some sort of brain injury, all of a sudden they stop speaking. Well, we go, well, what part of the brain was damaged? Or if somebody is hit on the head or in a car accident or something like that and they lose vision, we go, okay, what part of the brain was damaged? And based off where the damage is, that gives us an idea of what that brain is doing, what that part of the brain is doing for the body there. Here's some visuals showing the brain's kind of an animation, so you can kind of see it spinning around. You can see kind of there's these openings in the middle of the brain where cerebral spinal fluid kind of helps nourish the brain. And this is just kind of interesting when you can see the eyes kind of going back to the very back of the brain with the occipital lobe in the back there. All right, so you can go ahead and name the brain parts. We've got our two hemispheres, we've got this region that connects the two, and then we've got kind of these four major lobes up here, and then this fifth region down below. So check your notes or check the worksheet if you need help doing that. All right, moving on, we've got the peripheral nervous system. So this is basically everything that's outside of the brain and the spinal cord. There's a whole bunch of them, lots and lots and lots of them, but we're going to focus on kind of two groupings. One group we'll call the cranial nerves. And they're the things that go out through the opening of the skull and stimulate regions of the head and neck. And then all the rest of these are what we call spinal nerves, and they come out from the spinal cord. And some of you may have heard of like the sciatic nerve, so sometimes that gets pinched. It's in people's legs and hip there, and they have a condition called sciatica where they have pain in their legs. So that's kind of an important one. But there's all these other nerves that kind of come down throughout the rest of the body and innervate different parts of the body there. But we're just going to focus on cranial nerves, spinal nerves. All right. And then, so what sort of things do these nerves do, right? The part of the peripheral nervous system. So as we mentioned, they detect what's going on, either in the world around us or inside our own body. So we've got kind of a group of 5 major detectors here, 5 major receptors. So chemoreceptors that detect chemicals, photoreceptors that detect light, mechanoreceptors that detect touch or pressure, thermoreceptors that detect changes in temperature, and then pain receptors to detect injury to our tissue. Interestingly, we have no pain receptors in our brain, so when they do brain surgery, they actually have to keep people awake so they can talk to them and find out and make sure everything's feeling okay to them, because they can't actually feel any pain in their brain there. All right, so the next thing we have is the motor division. So remember, we've got the sensory things that detect it. That sends information into the central nervous system. That's our blue line. And then we've got our red line coming back, sending information out to our motor system, motor division that's going to decide what it's going to do. So within the motor division, we've got what we call somatic nerves, and those are things that are under our conscious control. So we can choose to move our arms or move our legs. And then we've got what we call the autonomic nervous system. And those are the things that we don't really control, heart rate or digestion. And we don't have to think about our heart beating. It does that automatically. Right? And then we also have some things that never even make their way to our brain. They just are all processed inside the spinal cord. We call these parts of the reflex arc. So here you can see, for example, in this case, the person's walking along, they stub their toe. That signal is sent up through the leg, through the sensory neuron, goes to this region called an interneuron in the spinal cord. And then it goes, oh, we better adjust our foot so we don't fall on our face. And it sends a signal back out through that motor neuron to cause this leg to tighten, contract that muscle, which causes the leg to go forward there. So one of the things that you do when they go to the doctor is they do things like they tap your knee or they do some other things to kind of check to make sure your reflexes are working the way they're supposed to. And some people are more responsive than others, and that's just part of this natural part of variation of being human there. And then within the autonomic system, we've got 2 modes. You can kind of think of as the restful or the anxious mode. The first one is the parasympathetic, that prepares the body to relax, rest, and digest. So you can see some of the things that happens in the parasympathetic. Flow of saliva, heart rate slows down. Peristalsis is we'll talk about digestive system, but it's increasing kind of the rate that stuff goes through your intestines. We release bile from our liver to increase breakdown digestion. And then on the other side, we have the sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight or flight response. So if we detect danger, our sympathetic system takes over, heart rate increases, people tend to have a dry mouth, your pupils dilate to allow more light in, dilate, which means to open up the bronchi of the lungs to get more air in, and then all this kind of digestive stuff slows way down, and then we secrete adrenaline, noradrenaline, norepinephrine into the blood to kind of pump things up a little bit. I'm excited there. So those are the 2, parasympathetic and sympathetic. And if you then kind of from here on out, if you've got questions, there's several questions that kind of go along with that. You can look at the information there. That kind of wraps us up at the end of part 2 of the nervous system. All right, thank you very much.